D-BT11 format is finally wrapping up in English after having wrapped up in Japan for quite a while now. And unfortunately, I haven't really had time to do a proper meta-analysis ever since the set 10 format. So in order to catch up a little bit, we're going to take a look at some highlights of set 11. There's still a tiny bit of legality left for it in the English tournaments. And of course, there is a lot of decks from this format that still stay very relevant in future formats too. So today we're going to go through the usual style of looking through different decks and featuring competitive builds for every single one of them from this format in terms of what topped in Japan throughout this period. Dragon Empire cannot be talked about without Gandiva. So this was a top from Trail, of course, where we still saw a high count of the countercharger Bausen being played, and of course the cycle card being played as well before Bastion was even a thing in the set 12 format, which we're going to see go up in count later down the line. Of course, in Japan now, Styrguna is restricted to 1, and this deck has still kept up innovating despite that. But Gandiva is definitely, you know, whenever somebody asks me, it's like, oh, what deck should I play for a tournament? It usually is Gandiva that I tell them. Otherwise, basically just pick up something like Orphis Regis, which we'll talk about in next week's video. However, for the English format, one big addition that wasn't actually there in set 11 properly, I suppose, or prior to set 11, was Megalonozuchi, which of course is the stealth promo, which basically uses the stealth ride line of Shoujo Doji, but instead chooses to play a lot of the other support cards that we see here in set 11 too. There's basically, on top of course, Megalonozuchi being a brand new card to the English format in general, Megalonozuchi got 3 new support cards as well, with the grade 3, grade 2, and grade 1 stealth cards that basically allow you to have, you know, more searching, more consistency tools, as well as the ability to, instead of bot decking your opponent's bind zone cards, you know, get things like extra power to your Vanguard, or generating soul and getting extra draw as well. Shoujo Doji is a complex deck because it really needs you to plan ahead of turns on quite a bit ahead of like the average deck. So I think if you're interested in this kind of play style, then I definitely do recommend picking up this deck as well. Overlord still made some rounds in set 11 as well, and of course we saw this from WHB Osaka, where we saw a lot of people pick up a random common card from set 7 actually, which is the mid-hat that basically says whenever your card is stood by an ability, you can put him, you know, retire him and then draw a card. So that way you'll have a better chance to draw into not just your PGs, which are very important in surviving formats of course, but also for drawing into your overlords, whether it's to set up the normal overlord into your soul, or if it's to set up, you know, the end for Persona Ride. It's pretty fascinating how Overlord just always continues to perform no matter what. It just kind of feels like no matter how people rate it in tier list, it is always going to be there in tournaments. And so if you invested in Overlord early on, I feel like you've been rewarded for a very long time. Tamayura is of course one of the big additions of the set 11 format, as she is one of the Crate Cross Epic ride lines that got big support with her new form, and of course now the new Ririmi Rarami are even easier to use. While the deck build itself is relatively fixed and there isn't too much space, some people play Latifa in here as well, which we'll talk about in a future meta-analysis, but we can see a much more aggressive stance on the deck being taken instead, right? So we see the grade 3 Fox art that calls out cards, you know, your Ririmi Rarami that you Soul Blast out instead of playing the Blitz Order. Some people do play like a 1-1 split of the Blitz Order and the Superior Call Order, but the new Tamayura basically makes the deck a lot less CB heavy, so you can use your CB on your grade 1 Ririmi Rarami a lot more consistently without having to worry about it. Broken Toys is very important in this deck because you need to see it every single turn leading up to your grade 4 turn, or not grade 4, your turn 4 basically, as it helps to really set up your hand and set up your soul. And on top of that, this deck is like, despite having not many different cards in it, it is very flexible in its game plan. You can choose to aggressively play your early turns and just kind of like push with Ririmi Rarami, and then they kind of go back to your soul, which means that decks like Gandiva don't necessarily pick it off too much, which is really important. So Tamayura was actually a pretty big winner in set 11 in my eyes, and so therefore I think you definitely should be expecting to see this in BCSs going forward too. And finally, the new kid on the block was Vermillion in this format. Of course, Vermillion in Japan has had a shop tournament promo added to it, which has made it a lot better. But this is kind of what the decks looked like back in the, you know, post-release. So this was from WGP Nagoya, which was held right after set 11 release as well. We can see that the ride line is fully maxed out in both the grade 1 and the grade 2 lines as well. Latifa is being played just to make sure you always have superior calling. Of course, Rising Phoenix is the most important part of the deck here and being able to give you multi-attacks. And the Vermillion Thunderbolt Order, of course, is the main win con of this deck. It's actually pretty interesting how Vermillion, well, it's not necessarily a tier 1 deck by any means. It is a deck that can pop up in some metas and be a huge counter to some matchups, and even right now in the set 13 format, some people were thinking about playing it because getting rid of your opponent's units when they can't really do too much about it while pinging damage can be really annoying. And if you underestimate Vermillion, it really does come in just swinging really hard, and all of a sudden you're taking extra damage and not really being able to deal with the big blows. So it's a deck that you definitely have to prepare and playtest for as well. Moving on to Dark States, Jett still saw a little bit of play here and there. It was still a very strong deck in this format too. Of course, it was supported by the Valnot overtrigger. So this is a brand new OT that basically lets you have 200 million attacks on a restanding rearguard. It works pretty well in Jett because you already have pressure from your next stage, so you're already looking very strong. But this build in particular was very interesting because it actually ran the grade 2 cycle card, the Nina, which you would be thinking it's like, oh, I mean, you have to, you know, Persona Ride to activate her on-call effect. But the whole point of this card is that when you ditch it in the ride phase, you soul blast 1 to draw a card. So you could ditch 2 of her to stride and then be able to soul blast 2 and draw 2 while striding, which is really nice. And we even see the Rising Dragon being played here just for that on-call, put a card from hand to soul to draw 1 ability. You're able to fill up soul this way and, you know, convert it into GG draws very easily or into the Nina draws as well. So this was a very original build for Jett, and that's not where the originality stops either. From WGP Shanghai, we saw a very interesting build as well that used what I like to call this the Kirby package. So set 11 introduced a bunch of commons that basically work around each other, like standing, resting each other, like pulling each other. And in that sense, you basically have this little package that, you know, it builds a little bit of soul. It is able to also provide you with a bunch of extra power, good attackers, good upstream targets, and, you know, all the same time you're just using your GG to keep drawing cards and gaining advantage. So it was a very original version of the deck that I think was really worth the highlight. And so, you know, the Jett mains are cooking, so definitely let them cook. Greedon got some pretty big support, of course, in this set by Greedon Masks being introduced. Greedon Masks trades the ability to restand the Vanguard multiple times by only having the Vanguard restand once, but in exchange, you get a bit more rearguard attacks and overall a very consistent guard restrict too, with a lot of the more consistent tools of searching Desire Devils as well. So one of the additions in set 10 was the Fujo. So this was the card that's in soul. Whenever your Greedon Vanguard attacks, you can bind it from the soul to basically battle door your opponent. So it's pretty annoying because you often want to PG the Greedon attacks because they're restanding, they're going to all in on the Vanguard, so you're always kind of scared of that. So they basically Greedon you, I mean, they battle door you on Greedon every single attack, which is really annoying. So that was a big inclusion from set 10 we didn't get to talk about in the past. And from set 11, there was the Sasho, who basically counts himself as the same name as your other Desire Devils in the Soul. So just adding more Desire Devil names as well to your, you know, the count for Greedon Masks. And he's also a 10k shield and 15k body that of course helps a lot in just being able to fend off attacks on the defensive turns. And that gets to use the Clean Sweep Dragon pretty well as well, just because you don't really use that much CV, so being able to get rid of your opponent's board while pressuring them with multi-attacks definitely makes Greedon quite a threat. Another big winner from this set is Chaos, actually. So I think a lot of people maybe were underestimating Chaos for quite a bit, but this is a deck that started popping off in set 11 and kept on getting tops every single format going forward. Of course, it is the high rolly deck that it is, but Chaos got some really big support. Of course, the new grade 3 form being the main highlight. What's really big about the new grade 3 form is that it allows you to get stuff back from your soul and call 1 out and add 1 back to hand. So you get to basically add back any of your OTK tools that you would need to just one-shot your opponent on that turn. And he also gives all of your units in main phase plus 10k and gives himself a crit, which means that everything is swinging for huge numbers. Don't forget that grade 3 Mikani says that whenever your Vanguard attacks, if you have 8 or more different types of soul, he stands, and so therefore you already get 5 attacks confirmed by just having 2 grade 3 Mikanis on the board. And everyone likes to pair this with the Quenlu, who basically says that as long as you have 7 or more soul, when you put her to the soul, you give one of your rearguards the skill that your opponent cannot guard with grade 1 or greater against it. So you buff up your Mikanis like crazy, you know, with Persona Ride and the extra buff from the Chaos, and you're basically just making them swing for huge numbers with Sentinel Restrict, and they're swinging for 2 times each. So you basically are just playing this OTK deck that wants to just set up the different types of soul as fast as possible. You use the promo order as well to look at top 5 of your deck, and then basically just kind of like set up your soul a little bit while also buffing up your Mikani rearguards. So just with the order, the Chaos skill, and Persona Ride, your Mikani swinging for 43k minimum with that guard restrict. And so therefore, if you want to play this kind of like more risky OTK style deck, Chaos is really, really good. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the old Sharrod from the end of G era. So it's pretty risky to play, but it's very rewarding if you do really commit to it. I know a lot of Chaos mains that just like kind of play this deck all the time now. So it's honestly really interesting, and I do recommend picking it up if you are interested in that kind of playstyle. Moving on to Brandt Gate, we saw Ella the Glimmer pick up a top in the set 11 format. So this is of course the old promo boss unit that basically plays like not really Highlander, but just a complete roulette of different orders. So if you don't know what it actually does, it's when it's placed on Vanguard Circle, you look at the top 5 cards of your deck and put all the set orders you find there to your order zone immediately. And then in a battle that he attacks, you choose any number of set orders in your order zone, and if you chose 3 or more, he stands a rearguard of your own. If you chose 5 or more, he stands himself. And, of course, he gets plus 10k power and minus 2 drive, and all of the orders you selected by this ability get put back to your deck. Now, what's interesting is that this skill is not once per turn. I think that's a thing that people miss quite easily. So he can technically continue to select 5 orders if he can set up that many and just keep on standing, or you can select 5 the first time, stand a rear and stand him, and then swing with that rear, swing with him, and then select 3 again to stand another rear still. So, you know, you just go Persona Ride and you basically bash them down, and it's pretty strong. The only rearguard in this deck is Combined Rusher, and you're basically just setting up a bunch of Combined Rushers while using the Archite Ride line to, you know, just find the research card basically that you have in there. And the research card actually does something in this deck, because you look at top 5 for Kaiju, and Illithid Glimmer is a Kaiju, so you basically get to add Persona Ride to your hand. You run the Shadow Army making order from Orphist as well, so that's another strong rearguard that you have on the board. So it's overall very interesting. And so this is a more fun deck, I guess, but it managed to get a top not just in WGB Nagoya, but it's had tops in previous formats and other tournaments as well. So if you want to just kind of mess around with something surprising, this could be the deck for you. And then finally, Eva, of course, got her big upgrade in this set too, but of course Combined Rusher was still restricted at this time. So this was a list that I was also piloting, a pretty similar one at some point, but you can see some of the new inclusions, such as the Poison in Paradise Eva, of course, which is in a split count between the original Eva as a 3-2. 3 copies of Habitable Zone, just so we can actually find it, you know, because now we are still searching the top cards with the original Eva, but the new Eva doesn't do it as much because she only searches for set orders. But we see the inclusion of the Blitz order from set 11 that lets you choose 2 of your different named grade 2 or greater unit cards from your drop and call them to Guardian Circle, and also give one of your units plus 10k for the battle. So you choose grade 2 Obscurate, grade 3 Obscurate, that's already 20k shield plus this, so it's basically a 1 card 30k shield, which is pretty good, you know, you push yourself to 43, and that is also pretty strong. Here's a Blitz order, so it gets over any of your opponent's guard restricts too, because you're calling these cards from drop, not from hand. And of course, we're still playing the dock just like we were in set 10 as well, because it gives you that extra big push of being able to turn your habitable zones as well as your grade 2 Obscurates into huge boosters for your grade 3 Obscudates. Keter got a lot of surprise tops in this format too. PBO, of course, managed to see a top with just the inclusion of the new Valnot Overtrigger. So, you know, you swing in the order where your Blaster Dark still gets to get called out first before you drive check. So once the Blaster Dark gets called out, if you flip a Valnot, you get to make it attack twice with 100 million, which is pretty good. So this top was happened in Trail, and you can see, of course, the Spiral Cutie being played here as well, just to make sure you always have cards, and you can also check the top cards of your deck too, and you have that extra CB to use. But of course, if we're talking about Keter in this format, there is nothing crazier than the WGB Malaysia MLB that made big rounds at this time. Even I picked up this deck because I was just like so impressed by the fact that it popped off. And so this list I'm showing you is actually my own, so I managed to take this to a trail top with you know, just kind of playing along the day and learning the deck as I went. It's a really fun deck just because you're able to basically set up a 15k body that tanks a lot of your opponent's multi-attacks, and so it's pretty good in aggro metas too, especially if you can go first, just to make sure that you get up to that 15k body first. But apart from that, like, you're able to do 4 attacks, you're able to do, you know, your Spiral Cuties just to keep drawing cards and, you know, setting up the top cards of your deck too. You have removal in the early game thanks to Blaster Blade and Blaster Dark as well. Emmeline, of course, is one of the best aggro tools as well, so you basically, you know, if you go first, you go turn 2, just kind of like tri-lane them with Emmeline and you're swinging for big numbers. So overall, MLB is very straightforward and very strong, and it should be relatively affordable too. I think, you know, Emmeline reprint did happen in English now too. So I really recommend picking this deck up. It was super fun. I had so much time, just like I basically was just missing a couple of the promos and they were really cheap. So I was like, well, I might as well sleeve up MLB and give it a try at this singles tournament, and it ended up going really well. But of course, if we're talking about big Keter winners from the set, it is Minerva. Minerva God, Rare Limb. I already made a huge guide about Minerva herself, so make sure you check that out if you want more detail about it. This list we can see here is from BCL Guangzhou, so this one was running the 4 Melissa 1 Cider lineup. But on the other hand, you also see a very common lineup from the Ultimate VGCS here, where of course you see 4 Cider 1 Melissa as well. We sometimes see like a 3-2 count as well, but basically everything else is sort of just fixed in this deck, right? All of the encounter related cards, Rare Limit 4, you know, the Painkiller at 4, the Spiral Cutie at 4, the Seisos at 4. Overall, the deck is kind of fixed already, but it is very strong. It can do aggro early game. It can have like very strong extra combo plays. If you kind of miss some of the combo decks like Victor from the G era, this deck definitely feels a lot like them, so I would highly recommend picking it up if you missed that kind of playstyle. Hexope, of course, got her big feature in the previous set, but she got a bit of extra support in the Festival Booster 2. Mainly Sajas, of course, being added is a huge rearguard for Hexor because it looks at the top cards of your deck, and so therefore it is very good at just being able to, you know, it's a good attacker to restand as well. We see this person play their lag rail as well, just to kind of like dump all that extra CB into an extra drive check, which is pretty ballsy, but I respect it. But Exor will get featured again next set because she gets another extra double rare that's really, really good. So let's leave the comments for that. And of course, another big support from this set was Thraia. So the new Thraia basically allows you to activate Persona Ride twice per turn, and the Persona Rides go 15k power, so therefore you give plus 30k to your entire front row. And this is pretty huge because you're always doing 4 attacks minimum. Whether it's 4 attacks with a restanding rearguard column or 4 attacks with a restanding Vanguard, it's really strong. If Thraia goes first, you're basically getting just pile driver rushed like really quickly, and it just feels like you're being hit with hammers. Like every attack hits for 50k. If you don't have PGs, you just kind of die. So I had the unfortunate experience of running into this deck at one of my rounds in WGP Nagoya during this format, and it definitely hurt a lot. So Thraia is definitely a force to be reckoned with. And the brand new blonde boy on the block, of course, is Azel. Was reintroduced in this set too, and it managed to find a couple tops here and there, and managed to top in WGP Nagoya here. So we can see a lot of the Azel related cards are run at max copies. We're seeing 3 of the Azel order and 1 of the Minerva order. That basically is a Pot of Greed. The order cycle card is also being played because of course you play a lot of orders in this deck, so you can soul boss 1 every turn to either like find more orders or call more cards. Sajas is very nice in this deck as well because it's just a nice way to get over your opponent's defensives. Otherwise, things like the Silverfang Witch help you draw cards. The Drain, of course, is the most important card in the deck, and being able to actually enable what Azel wants to do and being able to call new cards to your front row circles and get those 5 attacks. But just the Superior Ride in this deck is really strong. You do have to be careful with it, you know, against some of the decks in the future that really profit off your opponent being on grade 3. But otherwise, if you go first, you can basically Persona Ride on your opponents, you know, before they even get to grade 3, which is really strong. So for that reason, Azel is definitely going to be a threat in the future, I think, as well. So keep your eye on it. And up next, we had the Card Fest in Thailand, where Leonor, one of our dear channel members and of course the Twitch subscribers, Jean, managed to take it all with Leonor. And I was really happy with this because I'm a huge Leonor fan myself, and Leonor Masks is a deck that I think is really good because of how strong it is and its potential going second. We see the Misty Arc Habitat, of course, being played here, which English does have now, which is an amazing Stoicheia order. Letting you call anything from top 7 as long as it's equal to or lower grade than your Vanguard is a huge skill. And so being able to target things like your Tide Line, being able to find your mushrooms if you don't have them already is really huge. You can find Depth Ailey as well, which can help you find your mask, and then find Leonor masks as a result too. So this deck is really cool. You know, you run initially you run the Roroa Ride Line just to have that token to rush a little bit, and then after that you run into the grade 2 of the Zorga Ride Line to get your orders back after playing the Misty Arc Habitat. So it's overall really cool, and Leonor will get support again next set and the set after that, and so she's only gonna get better. And as also a Leonor fan myself, I'm very excited for her future, and I've been playing it quite a lot too in set 13. So huge props, very happy to see this. A deck that I heard people wanted to see more lists of, and I'm happy to feature, is Claudine. So this is a promo that was added to English recently too. Claudine's very interesting, where she lets you retire 3 of your rearguards to give herself the skill that all your plant tokens get plus 5k, so plant tokens are all 10k basically, and she gets a drive. And on top of that, she lets you bind an order from your drop to call 2 plant tokens, so you immediately get to set up 2 10k attackers. And when she attacks herself, she soul blasts 1 to stand a plant token, and then for every 2 different orders in your drop and bind zone, she gives that unit plus 5k. So you can see for that reason, we're running a pretty big myriad of different orders here as well, you know, between some blitz orders, as well as, of course, Misty Arc Habitat is being played here as well. The extra, you know, the Wandering Souls, the extra drive order from Zorga is here too. So a 4 drive Claudine is pretty scary. And on top of that, of course, Mushroom is very important to generate those plant tokens. Roaming Prison Dragon is played here because we do play orders. So if you high roll it in the, you know, the early game, you can just kind of call it out and like rush your opponent with the extra crit too. So Claudine's really interesting. I think there's still a lot of exploration to be done before a true fixed and solved list is made for Claudine. But if you want to just kind of cook with the deck, I think this is a good way way to start. Maelstrom managed to get itself a top. It does have a new promo. So this is the new Brave Shooter. So this one basically gets plus 5k for each of your, the Maelstrom orders in your order zone. And when your other rearguard in the same column as this attacks, while he's in the back row, he basically kind of wants to swap positions with that unit. So you get to get an extra attack, right? So it's another extra attacker to make sure that you're doing your Maelstrom consistently. So it's a good little promo, but not too much else to really focus here. I think we do get more Maelstrom support in the next set too. So we'll talk about that next time. Zorg, of course, continues to be a dominant force in this format too, and I'd say the list itself doesn't change too much. We just see new inclusions here and there. Valnod is a really good OT in this deck as well, because of course it's usually a 3-attack deck unless you use Keel Severing, which we see in this list as a 2 of. Usually you see it as a 1 of or even 0 of. But Valnod, of course, lets you give that restanding, OT skill to your roaming Prison Dragon, which is really scary. And we see the 1 of Misty Arc Habitat, which I think we'll see being bumped in the future to a couple more copies too, as just another good inclusion for your Alchemagics. Flagberg managed to get a top, and once again, Misty Arc Habitat, I can see as a 4 of. Basically every single Stoicheia deck wanted to put it in, and it is a very good card. We also see the Forbidal here being played as it calls out 2 of your grade 3 rearguards. So it's a great way to find your Shelling Cannon as well as your Inlet Pulse and just put them onto the field immediately from one card. And considering that Inlet Pulse gives you a card back, so you basically don't lose anything. So Flagberg, of course, still kind of hangs around there with his Guard Restrict. But Lyrical is arguably one of the biggest highlights that we haven't talked about yet. I didn't make a video during the Festival Booster meta, and so of course we need to memorialize Willista before she got her restriction. Willista was my main tournament deck for quite a bit after Eva fell off. It's just really strong, it pluses a lot, it does 5 attacks, it hits for huge power, it's drawing all the damn time, it can aggro your opponent too. This deck basically has it all. I did make a whole detailed deck profile, so if you want to really find out more about it and all the intricacies of this deck before Valstra Brown as well as the Elivira restriction comes in, you can check that out. But even after being restricted, this deck has still been picking up tops, and people are still playing it and just like putting in some of the new lyrical cards into it instead. So I highly recommend that you, check out my deck profile on this deck, as well as also check out some of the future videos where I'll talk about the meta, where we talk about Willista too. Leonor, of course, got her new form in this set too, and we see a pretty interesting thing where the new form for Leonor is just mainly played in the Ride deck as just kind of like the first grade 3 turn. She lets you superior call something, which is really nice, and just being able to plus on Ride is cool. And then she just sings a song and then kind of like passes on that, and then if you ever rewrite her in the late game, you get to basically have Sentinel Restrict plus an extra drive on her. And she always has a Sentinel Restrict, but here the extra drive is kind of like that extra bonus factor. But usually we just kind of go for the old Leonor because she is the one that lets you sing something in the main phase, and that kind of like sets up your board and sets up your combo for the battle phase pretty well too. And the one other new card is the Shivan, who basically for on call lets you CB1 to get top 5 for 2 different Leonor grade 3s and add them to your hand. And if you didn't, then you draw 1. So it's a plus no matter what, and basically just gives you more kind of card draw ability, paired together with the Mariru, which is a 20k beater rearguard, which is really strong, and also a Song Searcher, which was a much needed actual support for Leonor in this set as well. So having a Song Searcher, of course, feels like an auto-include 4 of, which was from Festival Booster. Then Celestial was a huge one, so this actually won quite a lot of events and like topped a lot both in Japan and throughout Asia. So Celestial's new form essentially allows you to have like Raging form, right? So you're basically attacking with your Vanguard multiple times on top of all the other things that this deck was doing. So she lets you superior call a card with the Black Wings ability in the main phase, and then on White Wings you get to essentially just search out the old Celestial and ride her, and then you keep looping between the Celestials, which is really good. They also got a rearguard that sits behind Celestial and just restands when you re-ride your Celestial, and put back Celestial grade 3s back to your deck so you don't run out of gas too. So overall, Celestial just got really good support in this set too. It's like if you ever missed Raging form, she's basically just chilling in the Lyrical right now. And the final big Lyrical deck that got support in this set was Felty Rosa. So this Felty list is running just a regular Felty ride line, but we often see people play the Willista ride line instead, and also run one of the Willista gem to draw cards in the early game and build soul. But the new Felty is kind of still Bastion-like. The kind of big thing is that you can set up a Felty grade 3 in the soul in the early game, so that when you ride her and then on turn 3 going first, your Ghost rearguards already have plus 10k. On top of that, she basically has just a buffed version of her old skill on herself too, making it so that every time you drive check a normal unit Ghost or a Felty Rosa grade 3 card, you get to call it out to rearguard circle, and if you did, she gets a drive, and she gets that skill twice. So it's overall just an upgraded version of the old version, and the cycle card from Festival Booster is also a Ghost, which enables multi-attacks and also of course the ability to get extra power. You also got a really good new grade 1 that after the battle that she boosts, you basically, as long as you have a Felty Vanguard, you simply want to put her and another rearguard to the soul in the same column as her to draw a card. So you can call it Felty and then put that into the soul to immediately set up Felty's extra buff skill. And then they also have a grade 2 that they got from the Festival Booster set as well, that when it's placed other than from hand to rear, so basically by Felty's top deck skill, you can choose another unit in the same column as her to stand it and give that unit or herself plus 5k. And when she attacks, she also gives herself plus 5k and bot decks herself, so she opens up that rearguard circle for Felty to call to as well. So overall, Felty, while still kind of Bastion-like and, you know, sometimes you just whiff and nothing happens, she did get some good support in this set, so she is another meta deck to definitely be part of the top rankers. And that's a kind of look over the set 11 as well as Festival Booster format. I apologize for how late this is. I definitely wanted to get it out a lot earlier, but unfortunately I was just really busy with a lot of other things. I'm going to try to get the set 12 one out next week so that for you guys that are getting into the set 12 format now for all your upcoming BCSs, have a lot of decks to refer to. We'll look at some of the decks that got upgrades in this set, but of course there's some decks like Lyrical ones that of course just kind of stay the same or like have some small improvements with time. So we will feature those as we go along as well. But other than that, if you like this video, please do give it a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe. I really do appreciate subscriptions. If you are a Vanguard fan, this is kind of the place to be. And if you want some bonus content such as some first-person POV fights of some of the most recent decks such as in set 13, you can become a YouTube channel member to get access to all of that beautiful content, as well as a whole other section of my Discord. But with that, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.